What up? Welcome back, everybody, to the Pat Flynn Show. Here once again with our good buddy, Dr. Jim Madden.
Good to see you, Pat.
For a free-for-all Q&A episode. Now, sometimes we sort of specify or I guess restrict the Q&A sessions to either like fitness or philosophy. Today, it's anything you guys want. And I can see we have questions on everything from vegetarianism to the Trinity. So it's going to be wild today, folks.
It's on like Donkey Kong. I feel like, Pat, we have the good stuff today. And the gentle listeners are there with us, right?
Yeah, I'm feeling a little funky. So we're going to get a little funky in the stream. Gentle listeners, if you're hopping in, please let us know what questions you have in the chat box, wherever it is. I'm just going to do some random pointing. It's somewhere. Please like, please subscribe, please share with both of your friends. We'd really appreciate it. And
definitely.
Yeah, we'll get warmed up here a little bit first with some preliminaries. There was first off, keep an eye out because probably Friday we're going to be doing the big unveil. But Jim's website is like this close to launching, so
it's almost there.
And it's almost there. It's super cool because it's going to be philosophy and fitness, mind body, just like we do on here. So
exactly.
So that's coming up. What about you, man? What else is new? Anything else you want to announce before we dive in here?
Not much. You can follow me on Twitter now. That's new, right? At JD Madden 3 on Twitter, right? So that it's a new world, man. It's a new world, right? Other than that,
let me link that.
Yeah, we'll put that in there. Other than that, looking forward to launching the website and seeing where all that goes, right?
Yeah, that's and my understanding is you will have a free little workout guide as well. Is that correct?
There will be a collection of 5 what I call excuse busting workouts, right? That include warm up, strength, and conditioning in 30 minutes. And I know a lot of times you hear this, right? In the workout, that doesn't actually take 30 minutes, but literally you are going to set a clock for 30 minutes, get your warm up and your workout done in that time, 100%. So that's coming. 5 of those.
Boom.
So you have no reason ever to miss a workout with these. Some of these are actually no equipment workouts too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, we're going to be talking about all that and sharing that on Friday. So please subscribe and please tune in then. If you haven't already chimed in the comment section, let us know what you're drinking at least. Say hello. Introduce yourself. It's always great to hear from all of you. It's always a pleasure to be here. What do you have in your cup, Jim?
I have coffee from the Sunflower. It's a coffee shop here in Atchison, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to them. Run by a Benedictine alum. And so my son, Patrick, had a few minutes extra before work. And I thought, hey, let's just, I'll give you a ride for once. And rather than walking and go to Sunflower, grab a coffee. So there we are.
Sweet. Perfect. Yeah, I've got coffee here. I've got iced tea here. This is the Pat Flynn combo in the morning. I was going to say it's the brain combo, but I'm not actually feeling particularly sharp today, so I don't know how well it's working. But I do 1 cup of coffee, 1 cup of green tea. That's
really
it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
When I was still a drinking man, I found iced tea was the key to the hangover comeback for me. But
is that right?
It was the hydration caffeine combination, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jim, we got a lot of questions. Should we get started here? All right. Cool. First one is a fitness question. It seems like we have more philosophy questions than anything today, so we'll get through as many as we can. This is a personal question for you, Jim. Swoomy wants to know if there's any plans for you to go back on the Giant program anytime soon.
There aren't, but by no defect of the Giant program. Partly it's got a pretty serious hypertrophy aspect to it, which really seemed to be working for me, but that's not kind of a place where I want to go. I struggle with getting bigger. I don't want to get bigger. Like I very easily get bigger. And 2, I've been developing a lot of my own stuff for programming that I'm going to make available to you all. And so I moved away from it, but not because it's a great program. So if you're looking for pretty, just 3 times a week, very challenging, strength and conditioning-ish, right, and some muscle building, it's a good program. But I will say it's a jealous mistress. Like when you start getting that really high volume, clean and double press, it is a little costly in terms of recovery. So I would probably not do it for most people unless that's going to be kind of your main event, like your main exercise sport commitment is that program. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's hard to work around. Yeah,
yeah. Shout out to Jeff, great guy.
Yeah.
We got to get him back on here soon at some point. That was a fun conversation we had.
Yeah.
All right, next one comes from Harry. He says, do you think that the current statistical decline in Western Christianity will stop and be reversed in 100 years or so, similar to how religion came back after the fall of Soviet Union? Yeah, Jim, do you have any prognostications on this? I don't know if I have.
Yeah. I don't like to do armchair sociology. Okay, but I will.
Next to armchair psychology is my favorite.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, but I usually kick the empirical questions to my good wife, but I'll weigh in here. I don't think so. Right. Okay. And well, one, I wonder how much of a comeback Christianity has made after the fall in the Soviet Union. I mean, certainly it's going to do better when it's not like, being directly regulated by the state and borderline illegal if it's not in the state regulated thing, that you had in the Soviet Union. But I mean, my understanding is that the current Russia is not exactly, a Christian paradise either. I could be wrong. Okay. But moreover, look at Christianity, suppose it does make a comeback after the fall of the Soviet Union. That's because you had like a utter political cataclysm there. Like you had like a complete, like there was a revolution and then now, 70, 80 years later, you have another kind of counter-revolution, a complete, collapse of the entire governmental system and a flip. I mean, I don't think if that's what it takes to bring Christianity back as a cultural, mainstay, I don't know that I want to live through that. And the stakes in that would be like really, really high. You know what I mean? Maybe we would welcome it if it happened, but I can't find myself hoping for a cataclysm. Does that make sense? Right. And in my understanding of history, and I could be wrong, is I don't see an example of a culture that ever reversed its direction. Right. In going back to older ways without some kind of massive cataclysm. Right. Mm-hmm. And I'm not willing to like kind of embrace an apocalyptic vision like that just yet.
I like to be able to rest my head on the pillow at night. Which was hard to do last night because Wisconsin, apparently there was a tornado that landed not too far from my house.
Whoa.
Last night. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
We parked out in the basement last night. Crazy.
Yeah. And I'm the guy in Kansas. We haven't had anything like that this year.
Yeah. I don't know is my answer to this. As far as like, I think we're always going to see like, little trends here and there. And I mean, I haven't read, I guess, the most recent surveys in this or that, but it's true that there has been a great renaissance of Christian philosophy and Christian philosophers and a rise of theistic philosophy. Now, the question is how much of that will kind of trickle down into the popular culture. I think at least some already has, right? I think that there was that sort of new atheist movement that had a lot of popularity, but it's pretty much dead at this point, or it's on its way out. And there's a lot of young people. I'm one of them who really found that sort of paradigm and that worldview extremely inadequate and are looking back to ancient wisdom, ancient tradition. So that trend is there. I just am not confident enough to say how big it is or how long it will last or what sort of numbers are included in that. Right.
And, I've ranted about this here before, but the thing that worries me is I'm not very confident at all in that kind of rational apologetics as sort of carrying like the cultural day.
Oh right? Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Because
if we could just get the contingency argument in everybody's hands, right, and show them how to overcome the composition fallacy, then we'll all the problems will be gone. Right. Yeah.
Because when I look at I'll spend 15 weeks getting my students ready to understand the first cause argument as it really is. Right. Good luck doing that on Twitter, right? You know what I mean? But I guess what really worries me is because, for the vast majority of people who've been religious, whatever the religion is, right? For the vast sweep of human history, right? What kept belief moving from generation to generation, from person to person. It wasn't rational argument. It was the adoption of a way of life, right? It was like you were born into a family that was, just use our case, like Roman Catholic, right? That the sacraments marked all the great, landmark, ways in human life, right? They were the great transition points in human life. You went to a parish. That's the place where you were baptized. That was the playground you played on, right? Those were it was carried by this whole way of life, not individual, belief, right? Okay, you know what I mean? It wasn't transmitted by way of like evidence or even properly basic belief, anything like that. It was like first adopting a very practical way of life, and that disposed people to see what was there and then be open to reasons. Does that make sense? And what I worry about in terms of like the future of religion in the West is we're destroying our ways of life. Like we're absolutely destroying our ways of life and any kind of like organic connection to anything now, right? And that's what makes me kind of concerned.
Yeah, well, it makes me concerned too. And we've made the case of the necessity and the good of tradition, right? And this is why I enjoyed our conversation with Thomas Bogardus, who's been doing this big epistemology project where he wants to argue that knowledge is believing something because it's true.
Yeah.
And so long as you have a reliable testimony within a tradition that links back to a true event, you can legitimately have knowledge, right?
Exactly.
Through that.
And even if it never occurred to you.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Without necessarily adopting like Plantinga's epistemology or something like that. Which I'm actually far more sympathetic to Plantinga's project than I think many other who are in the sort of Thomistic-ish world.
Because Plantinga's a little closer to kind of what I'm saying here. Well, it's still, I don't think, far enough in that it, like he's saying, like mostly these are things that you begin with, not end with, right? Right.
Yeah, spot on. Good stuff. Yeah. All right, we're going to keep going here because there's a lot of good stuff. I want to get through as much as we can. If we need to just recommend further resources to shorten some of the responses, we'll do that. Yeah. Harry wants to know, what are our prayer and worship routines like? Well, mine's pretty basic. I'll start with mine. Mass, sacraments, right? Just like I harp the basics in fitness, I harp the basics in Catholicism, right? Mass, sacraments, scripture.
Keep it simple in this and everything else.
Daily rosary with the family. I think it's really important to get the family involved in prayer. So we do a daily family rosary. I try to do something by myself in the morning, whether that's just prayer by myself, a prayer walk. There's also this cool app I've been messing around with called the Halo app, which is just sort of it's an app for prayer and stuff. That's pretty nice. Or just reading scripture or something like that. So I try to do something by myself in the morning, and then just the Catholic basics. Try to get to adoration every now and then as well, more frequently than not recently, which is good. So nothing exciting, but I'm a fundamentals guy. So I think that applies, right? Mm-hmm.
No, I go to mass on Sunday and I read the Psalms in the morning. Right, that's my thing. When our kids were younger, there was a lot more of that kind of a, dedicated family prayer time. But now, like, good luck getting all of us in the same place at the same time, right? So, things have their season, right? And by the way, the routine, the tradition, all that has been taken up, right?
What about the self-flagellations in the cold shower, Jim? You still doing those? I do the cold shower, right? And you may hear the Lord's name while that's happening, but it'll definitely be in vain, right? We did an episode with Basong not too long ago, and he's all about trying to bring back the ascetic disciplines. Right? Yeah. Oh yeah. So I guess fasting and stuff like that. I actually fast now as much for, I would say, spiritual and religious purposes as I do just general health. And I don't think that there should be a distinction there, right? Like, I think it should come as a sort of package deal. That just makes sense, right?
I have a problem in Lent now. Like, I get to Lent and I don't eat on Fridays anyway at all now, like in my normal routine, right? Like Friday, I don't eat on Friday, right? And so I have to always come up with something new for Lent. Right. And also, like any good cradle Catholic, if you want to know the fastest confession, right? Like the shortest line of confession in Atchison, Kansas, I can let you know, right? Because cradle Catholics know how to game it. Yeah.
Right. Harry's killing it today. He says, what are your opinions on Machiavelli? Was he really the pagan, cold-blooded, anti-Christian intellectual? I'm not an expert on Machiavelli. I actually read him late high school, early college, and I haven't really returned to him since. So, Jim, why don't you go first on this one?
Yeah, I'm not a Machiavelli scholar, but I would take the man at his word on this, and it's a yes. Right. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So
that doesn't mean he isn't like, there isn't like if you want to like run stuff, that there might not be very important lessons to learn from Machiavelli about what it means to run something in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah. I had my very much Randian Machiavellian phase, that's just part of like late puberty, I guess, right? For anybody who's interested in philosophy.
And when you say that's a past phase, should we believe you?
Maybe not.
Maybe not.
All right, let's keep moving on. Sorry, I just I have a general position not to rush into making myself look foolish if I don't know a whole lot about a certain subject yet.
I recommend this.
Yeah, it's just a good policy. So we're not afraid to just say, yeah, sorry, can't help you. Harry wants to know our opinions on the French rationalists such as Voltaire and Laplace. I have no need for that hypothesis. Were they in part ideologically motivated by the aftermath of the French Revolution's anti-religious tendencies? So again, Voltaire, guy I spent a fair amount with in high school, but have not returned to very much since. Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, first of all, correct me if I'm wrong in the history here, but Voltaire definitely would not. I know Laplace's dates, but Voltaire is not dealing with the aftermath of the revolution. He's like one of the people that, is, I think, right, is like one of the intellectual inspirations for a lot of this, right? But Voltaire was actually a really complicated guy. I mean, so if you read Simon Schama's book Citizens, which I think is like your best read on the French Revolution, I really like a lot of Schama's stuff. He has a very interesting discussion of Voltaire that I didn't realize this. Like Voltaire had a chapel put in his manor, right? And he had mass said there twice a day.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I can't remember if Voltaire took the sacraments or not, right? And it's sort of like how much of this is hyperbole, and also like you have to understand too, like my understanding, I'm not a historian, but my understanding is like, any decent person should have been pretty upset with the French bishops, right? In 18th century France, right? It was
having legitimate grounds to be upset with the bishops.
Yeah, exactly, right. Yeah, right.
But when does that ever happen?
Yeah, and you have to understand, like too, like a lot of like what brought about the papacy was like the modern papacy in its like currently powerful form was like, because groups like the French bishops had so badly corrupted things and thereby leading revolution. So I think Voltaire is a very complicated figure. I think when he talks about like some of his infamous comments about the church, is he talking about the church, or is he talking about the French bishops, right? And those are two different things, my understanding.
Yeah. Cool. I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Good questions. Questions. All right, sorry, scrolling back up here. Satya says, hello from India, big fan. Can you give me an idea of a balanced vegetarian diet? Well, be aware of the common deficiencies, right? So a good multi is going to help. By vegetarian, does this are we allowing eggs in here? If pescatarian is an option, I would almost always certainly recommend that. I just recommend not being a vegetarian.
Yeah. So the only time I really seriously tried vegetarian was my first year in grad school, and it very quickly became the beer and tater tot diet, right? So, but I think especially if you're eating, you could do eggs, and that would really check the protein and fat box for you, right?
It would. So, and there's decent vegetarian protein powders now too.
Yeah.
I would definitely supplement with that. Make sure you have a good B vitamin supplement. Yeah. And then, most of the other stuff, your leaves and your berries and your nuts and your legumes, all good there. Just make sure you get the protein in and the micronutrients that sometimes can be a bit lacking on.
I have to admit, I've been tempted to try it just because I've just never done it. Right. I mean, like since the beer and tater tot, like half-assed attempt when I was 22. Right. Just because it's
beer and tater tot.
Yeah, not a good way to go. Not a good way to go. because I like to experiment with stuff, but my current diet is going so well for me. I'm not prepared to let go to try something else. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think you have to be like crazy on the meat eating, right?
Unless you're visiting Pat Flynn's house, then it's on.
Yeah. Then it's just, it's meat fest, of course.
Meat fest.
And I actually think that there's value in kind of cycling. I think there's value in taking a cyclical approach to dieting in general. And that includes just calories, but also a friend of mine, Sam, he has just one day a week where he just does no meat. And I think that's great. That's wise.
Yeah. No, I mean, I eat less meat since going keto than I did before. Because, yesterday I didn't eat meat, right? I mean, it was just, I had eggs and avocado and nuts and, some cheese and like a lot of days, like the only meat I'll have is like sardines, right?
Yeah.
And some days I'll eat a half pound of bacon, right? So,
yeah. I mean, Fridays, Fridays,
you don't eat
no meat.
Fridays.
Yeah, no meat Fridays for us. Oftentimes, no meat on Wednesdays too, and more fasting on those days. So follow a pretty Catholic fasting calendar, but that also includes days where I'm not just lighter calorically, but also just no meat and stuff like that. So I think that's good, because it is true, right? That especially like the charred fatty meats, it does seem like there's some pretty good evidence that those long term might not be the best. Might not be the best to continue piling in on your diet, right?
Yeah.
For various reasons, might increase cancer risk and heart disease risk and stuff like that. So, but at the same time, nobody wants to eat just like boiled chicken all the time either. So, got to have the occasional steak here and there. So, yeah, supplement it, man. Just supplement with the good protein powders. Get the B vitamins. Just whatever else you need, and I think you'll fare pretty well. Harry wants to know, from our perspective, has the Euthyphro dilemma been adequately solved? Yeah. So the Euthyphro dilemma famously goes back to Plato, and it's sort of a moral objection, right? And the idea is something good because the gods, but just replace gods with God, right? So is something good because God wills it, or does God will something because it's good? And the idea here is like, if you're a theist, neither of these is really attractive, right? If you're because the first horn makes it seem like the good is sort of arbitrary, right? That like it could have been otherwise, and that isn't in line with our moral intuitions. Like we seem to think that some things are like necessarily bad, like across all possible worlds, right? And the other is not attractive because then it seems to put like God under some standard higher than himself, right? Which is an issue for aseity and sovereignty and all that. I think the Euthyphro dilemma is a pseudo problem. And for classical theists, they don't have that issue because given the traditional metaphysics, goodness and being are convertible. So you can go between the horns of the Euthyphro dilemma and say God just is a subsistent good itself, right? So there's no distance or difference between God and the moral standard. God's very nature as a subsistent good is the good, is the moral standard, right? So God wills something because he is good. And that's why the things
which is to say that Plato solved this thing in the sequel dialogues to the Euthyphro.
Yeah, which most people are just unfamiliar with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and I think what people have to understand is like what the Euthyphro is, on my reading of it, the dialogue, okay, is because remember Socrates is debating with a pagan priest, that's Euthyphro, about what piety is, okay, and I think that is the kickoff of the Socratic Platonic attack on polytheism.
Yeah.
Okay. To say that polytheism is unsustainable, as the tragic poets seem to have figured out, in terms of it always leaves us with a tragic competition between competing goods, right? Deities, so-called. And ultimately what we need is a unified conception of a subsistent good that holds the whole value picture together, right? And Plato's famous the good, right? So yeah, I mean, I think the Euthyphro problem was like successfully solved by Plato,
which is very funny because it's one of these things that even among professional philosophers, like they seem to have no idea like how much not only has this been solved, but continually repeatedly addressed throughout the history of philosophy. It's just one of those things that keeps popping up again, not just at the popular level. You expect things to just kind of dumb thing. It's not dumb. It's an interesting consideration, but
Yeah.
you expect it. You see it at the professional level
Yeah.
coming up again and again and again.
Yeah, I mean, I just think because so many philosophical professionals are just woefully, untutored in the history of philosophy, right?
Yeah. All right. Let's keep going here. Harry, you got great questions. We're going to come back to some of your other ones here just because I want to get a few other folks in here, but I appreciate all the
other kids want to play, Harry.
Yeah, which is fine. You guys can submit as many questions as you want, but just want to get some other kids in the game. Anonymous person, great screen name, says, how do you argue for hylomorphism over a reductionist atomism where all material beings are reduced to their more fundamental physical constituents, say atoms or maybe particles or stuff like that? I think, I'll just do a quick comment here and then I'll let Jim get in on this. I mean, let me say this about what I think distinguishes good philosophy from sophistry, right? Good philosophy makes intelligible our actual experience, right? It helps to explain our actual experience. Sophistry, the mark of sophistry, for me, is typically when somebody is being clever about trying to explain away common experience, right? Reductionism is one of those things, right? So first off, there's just kind of reductions to the absurd with reductionism, right? And we can use retorsion arguments, right? Yeah. So the problem, if you want to say that the only thing that actually exists are, say, fermions and bosons, like fundamental particles or atoms or something like that, right? Well, there goes our personal identity, right, through change, right? So reductionists who are consistent with this will admit that, right? They'll say, Jim, you don't even exist, right? Because you're not the same bundle of particles that you were, 5 minutes ago or something like this. Now, the problem with that is there's going to be no way that you could ever argue into that position, right? Because I need to have something that endures over time to work through a series of premises and to reach a new conclusion and stuff like that, right? So it's kind of like trying to deny the reality of change. At the end of the day, you're always going to have to bring in the thing you're denying to support the position you're trying to argue for, right? So traditionally, right, people like Aristotle and others have thought, okay, here's what we need, right? We need a principle to make sense of something that stays the same, and we need a principle to make sense of something that changes. Call one of those matter and call the other one form, right? Right. And there you have sort of your hylomorphic worldview, and then how you kind of cash that out in all of his different instances is, of course, the great metaphysical project. But I think the first move is to show that reductionism isn't going to fly. It's going to be incoherent or self-defeating at the end of the day. It's not something that can be intellectually sustained. Once that move is made, then we start to try and do the necessary carving and see what the reductionist viewpoint might have missed. So, Jim, why don't you come in at this point, because I know you have much to say on this. Mm-hmm.
I had some kid noise to address there. Everything Pat said, right, first of all. But second, or a number of other considerations I'll bring in too. First of all, why don't we need an argument for reductionism, right? It's always this presumption, well, the reductionists, will fill in the blank. Merely recognizing the explanatory power of subatomic particles doesn't entail reductionism, right? So you're going to have to, in order for me to buy reductionism and all the prices it comes with, you got to give me a reason to actually think I need to be reductionist to admit the explanatory power of subatomic particles, right? And I've not seen that argument, right? Okay.
Right. So, the argument tends to be, well, science works.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, that's a terrible freaking argument, right? The Aristotelian Thomas doesn't disagree with that, right?
Yeah, exactly.
We're working with that same data point, right? The fact that science works or that physics is powerful is not an argument for reductionism, right?
And also, it's always ignored that there are perfectly seriously secular philosophers of science who will tell you they don't think subatomic particles exist, right? That they don't think theoretical entities carry with them ontological commitment. Okay, right. So one, the idea that somehow the fundamental level explanation, or I shouldn't say ontological level, is at the subatomic level, is itself controversial among even completely, totally naturalist philosophers of science, right? He's not a naturalist, but he's one of the great deans of philosophy of science today. I would highly recommend people check out Bas von Frossen on this, on theoretical entities. Okay, so other considerations. This is kind of a homey example, but I use this in a paper that I have coming out. If you walked into the room right now and you asked me, Pat says, Jim, count the objects in the room. Okay. And when it came to the desk I'm sitting at right now, if I counted the parts, but I didn't count the desk, Pat would look at me like I was crazy, right? Or even if I counted the parts and the desk, you would look at me as if I was crazy, right? And the reason is, in our kind of folk common sense ontology, desk parts are subservient or lesser than the desk as a whole. Okay. And why is that? Well, I think it's because we only define a desk drawer in terms of a whole desk. We don't define a whole desk in terms of the drawers.
Right.
Do you see what I mean? Okay, so there is an explanatory priority of the whole over the parts there when you're talking about something like a desk. Okay, now of course desks are they're artifacts, and I hate using artifact examples for this because they're flimsy. There's no fact of the matter what a desk is beyond what we say it is, but you see the point. Okay,
right.
And so there are cases though in our common sense where we prioritize whole over part in ontology and explanation. We would say desk drawers exist because of desks, right? Not desks exist because of drawers, even though we would admit there's certain parts that desks have to be what they are. Okay. And I think that the thing to understand is traditional Aristotelians, okay, are making their case for hylomorphism primarily based on the existence of organisms. Okay. And that organisms have an explanatory priority over their parts. Okay. And so I think we can make the same case. If you ask me, say, hey, count the objects in this room, and I count me, and then I count my liver separately, or I count my liver and my lungs and my brain, but I don't count me, you'd say you're kind of missing the point here. Okay. Because all of those parts are explanatorily subsidiary to the whole organism, right? And I think we can make this case philosophically, and I think systems biology is showing that going down even to the genetic level, right? We had this in an earlier podcast. We talked about genes. Even the idea that the way organisms work is genes up. No, they work organism down to genes too, right? There's an explanatory priority of wholes over parts.
Yeah, all the information is not in the genes.
Yeah,
right?
And if you want to get into organic molecules, all that stuff, a lot of that stuff only forms in the way it operates in an organism when it's operating in an organism. Okay. So I think for me, the case for hylomorphism is that you have whole to part explanation throughout nature.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. You have form to configured matter explanation throughout nature. Okay. And then thirdly, I think there's just this phenomenological case to be made too, is that the scientist has to step into our ordinary life world of middle-sized objects that are subject to change, that are subject to growth and decay and all these things that have abiding identity over and above their parts, just to set up an experiment, right? It's practically impossible not to exist in the world of ordinary objects. You have to manipulate tools to do this. Okay. So there's a kind of performative inconsistency in saying, right, that doesn't exist. And I would even go more existential, say there's something moving the scientist to want to do the damn experiment in the first place. Right. That is going to be very hard to identify with the action of subatomic particles.
Yeah. Yeah. So once you make those, that's beautiful, Jim. Once you make a number of moves. The first is to show that reductionism reduces to the absurd.
Yeah.
It's just going to always defeat itself, right? Yeah. At some very fundamental level, right? Yeah. Just like the denial of change does, or something like that, right? So that's the first move. Work the retorsion angles, then show that it's explanatorily inadequate. However powerful taking a reductive methodological approach in science may be, right? The problem The problem is people have turned a method into a metaphysics, right?
Yep.
That's the problem. When people have a method, they use a restricted method and they turn into a metaphysics. Actually, Ed Feser has a good analogy of this. He's like, if you think about physics, right? Yes, physics is powerful, right? It captures arguably some aspects of reality, but it doesn't mean it captures the whole of reality any more than a metal detector being very powerful at capturing metal tells you that plastic doesn't exist, right? Just because something is really good at something and in capturing some aspect of reality doesn't mean that it captures all of reality, or that certain things it doesn't capture don't exist. So don't confuse a method for a metaphysics. And then once you see the actual explanatory power that a hylomorphic worldview gives you, not just in common experience, but even in science itself, I think it's game, set, match, right, against the reductionism.
Yeah, I am right now, sorry, I'm getting a link to my most recent lecture I gave where I make a case for hylomorphism. So I'm going to.
Was that with the TI Institute?
It's a TI lecture.
That was a good one. Yeah, that was a good one.
It's the one at Auburn. So I'm just going to drop that in the comments.
Please drop it down, my friend.
How do I put a comment up in this piece?
Just in a chat box, I think. Just put a link in there, right? Does that work? All right.
Cool. I'll get that.
Cool. Really good good questions here. All right, let's go to this one here. John wants to know, last time I was on here, I asked about Father Karl Rahner. I don't know if I pronounced that. Rahner. Right, Rahner. Yeah. Who no one else has read. Yeah, we pleaded ignorant there. However, given that he was a student of Heidegger, I'm curious about your views of Heidegger and Christianity.
It's complicated. Right. Yeah. A lot of what Heidegger is doing is especially in Being and Time, is a sort of secularized version of a lot of like Christian theological doctrine, right? You know, I'll say this is you wouldn't go looking for Heidegger as your source of Orthodox Christianity. Okay. I think that's clear. However, I do think there is much Christians can learn from Heidegger. I'm one of them, I think, right? And let
that be said about many philosophers who are not.
Many philosophers, right. Yeah. And I think, and I want to go even further. I mean, it's there's an interesting thing. I mean, so, and also you have to understand, like, Heidegger was a rotten human being in many ways. Okay, but so are a lot of people. Okay, but he did, my understanding, late in life, write a letter to the bishop in his home diocese. Okay. And the bishop subsequently destroyed the letter, but then replied granting Heidegger permission to be buried in a Catholic cemetery. Yeah, interesting. Okay. He had been a seminarian. I think he started out a Jesuit seminarian. That didn't work out. I think it was a Dominican seminarian for a little while. That didn't work out. He did sort of leave the church, married a Lutheran woman at one point, right? But so much of what he's doing, especially in the later work, seems to be he's trying to figure out a way that we could see ourselves as encountering divinity in the wake of the death of God, right? And in that technical sense of what's meant by the death of God, okay? So I think in a lot of ways, what you have in Heidegger is an attempt to articulate what it would be to, recover Christian belief, right? Or Christian practice, at least, in like the sort of like postmodern, tragedy we're living through. Yeah.
Good. Anonymous person says, I've heard some say that essence is that which grounds properties, and it is itself not a property. So is essence a propertyless property bearer? If not, how should we understand essence? I think the first thing I'll say, again, a few quick remarks and then let Jim chime in here, right? It's just how different philosophy is often approached, right? Between, say, traditional Thomists and modern analytic philosophers, right? Yeah. I mean, just to give you an example, sometimes in sort of modern analytic philosophy, like property is just an exceedingly broad term that will be used to cover anything that we predicate of anything whatsoever with no. And I think this is a horribly impoverished metaphysical toolkit, right? Yeah. I think Thomism, Aristotelianism is like, that's the way you should go, right? So in there, we start to make distinctions between like that first configuration of being. That's how I think of essence, right? That in virtue of which something is what it is
Yep.
an essence, right?
Yep.
Then we can talk about properties
Yep.
in a Thomistic sense of that which properly flows from
Yep.
that configuration of being. And
Yep.
that would be something like me being using language that properly flows from my
Yep.
configuration.
The necessary accident.
As a rational animal.
Yep.
Then we can talk about other things, other attributes like contingent accidents, something that is not a necessary accident. Like, for example, my hair color or my skin color or something like that, right?
If you ever teach logic, you will never get them to get this distinction.
But these are necessary distinctions, right? You need these distinctions. Otherwise, you're going to be horribly confused about, I would say, reality in general. But certainly if you start doing philosophy of religion and work on God, and like so many of the confusions about classical theism and God's nature comes down to people just having an impoverished metaphysical toolkit, right? That just cannot make the necessary distinctions and carve reality in the way that reality is actually carved, right?
Yep. Yep. I agree. You know, I mean, and this is, you know, I'm not picking on the person who shall not be named, but
like the workout that shall not be named.
Yeah, no, the anonymous person, right? And I mean, just the idea, okay, so is the essence of a thing a property bearer? Well, essences, I mean, they don't have, I mean, they're a kind of attribute. Okay. You know what I mean? They're the substance bears properties, right? Okay. The substance has an essence, or the substance is an essence. Do you see that, right? There's this confusion between abstracta and concrete things that's always like rife in these kinds of discussions, right? And a lot of contemporary analytic philosophy, it starts treating abstract things as if they're concrete things, and it leads to all order of confusion. This is exactly what you were saying, right? And I'll take it back to Aristotle's categories, right? Categories 5, where he says, look, you've got substance in two senses. You've got what he calls primary substance, which is the individual thing that is a member of an essential kind, right? And I think he says, you know, a horse, a man, right? An ox, right? And it's important. Aristotle names organisms there. They're always organisms, right? And then there's the substantial kind to which the substantial individual belongs, which he says is substance in a secondary sense. He makes this distinction between the primary substance, which is a concrete existing individual thing,
right.
and secondary substance, which is an abstract thing, right? You see, it is a kind of predicate. It's that which is said of something, right? Okay, so he says that you've got 4 kinds of things. You've got things that are neither said of nor said in anything, right? Which is Pat the podcaster is one of those, right? You see, I mean, the individual, it's not a predicate in any sense. Then you've got things that are said of but not said in, which would be essential predicates. He calls those secondary substances. So rather than Pat, it would be humanity, right? But we've gone abstract there, right? Then Aristotle says there's things that are neither said of, that are both said of and said in, okay, which would be kind of like the individuating of Pat's abstract essence. And then he's got things that are only said in, which would just be accidents, right? But you see, my point there is, like, from the beginning in the tradition, there is this distinction between the substance in the concrete sense and the substance in the abstract sense, right? And that's what we mean by essence, is that abstract sense.
Yeah, and I also want to I'll bring
that was like a Unabomber treatise.
No, that's great, and I hope we're answering an anonymous person's question to his satisfaction. I'll bring in Sokolowski here. He's got a famous essay where he says the method of philosophy is really making and discovering distinctions. I think that's right, and so many distinctions have been lost that are necessary distinctions, and I think that has been to enormous detriment.
Yeah.
Enormous detriment, right?
Okay, and let's diagnose the problem, right? Because why do a lot of contemporary analytic philosophers, to just use the example that Pat brought up, miss this distinction between propria, right, property in the traditional sense, and accidents, right, necessary accidents, contingent accidents? Because you can't make that distinction in an extensional logic.
That's right.
There's no way to distinguish between essence and propria in extensional logic, right? In modern logic. So what happens is that it doesn't fit the modern logic. So we just chuck that.
So it's a reductionism again. It's a hilarious parallel, right? You have a powerful tool, which it is, right? But it's a tool that it doesn't give you absolutely everything. It doesn't capture everything.
Right.
And if you restrict yourself just to that tool, you're going to be missing stuff. You're going to be missing stuff that you really need. Right. Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good parallel. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do we'll come back to some other ones. We'll do a fitness question. John, I appreciate the super chat. We're going to get to that. So these Trinitarian questions, man, we're going to do a full episode on the Trinity here with Gavin at some point. So stay tuned for that. Raj has a fitness question here, so we'll just take a hard turn back.
Let's do it, Raj.
Yeah. He says, I'm currently only performing swings, clean and presses, pull-ups, and dips in my training. His gym's under lockdown. Will there be any imbalances once I get back to barbell training? Jim, this tea's running through me. Talk to this man for a minute. I'll be back in like 3 minutes.
Take care of business, man.
Yeah, I got it.
Yeah, Raju, I don't think so. I might at least get some squats, some goblet squats or something like that in your warm-up, right? Because it seems like you got swing, you got a clean and press, you got pull-ups, you've got dips. The only thing I would put in there would be something for the squat. Get some deep hip movement in there. Doesn't have to be loaded. I think if you're doing swings and cleans and presses, when you're loading your lower body, but in your conditioning, maybe get some body weight squats going, or in your warm-ups, get some goblet squats. If you want to load the squats, if you have access to that, enough weight to do that in your garage gym, or wherever you're training during the lockdown. I'm sorry you've been locked down again. That should do it. I'm a big believer that you need to train every movement pattern, right? At least periodically, but I don't think you necessarily have to load every movement pattern all the time. Okay. And it might be good to take a break. So the only thing I would add would be some squats to that. Right. But don't feel like you have to load them up real heavy. Cool. Did you make it in time, Pat?
Yeah, I suggest, I suspect you gave this man nothing but stellar advice.
Yeah, I just said he might add a little squatting.
Cool. Awesome. Yep. All right. Good question.
Thanks, Raju.
Ryan says, hey, Pat, Jim, it's Ryan from Ottawa, Canada. Greetings to you, my friend. All right, let's at least give a little treatment of the Trinity. We've got a couple Trinitarian questions in here. John, thank you for the super chat, by the way. That's at least one cup of coffee for both Jim and I. I'll be sure the funds make it to Jim's bank account at some point.
In cryptocurrency, please.
Indeed. Yeah. He says that the mutual bonds, which eternally constitute the three persons, who are each one and the same divine being, are the blessed inmost life of God. Unpack ? The Trinity. All right. Yeah. So I think when it comes to the Trinity, I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. You have to deal with the transitivity issue and the three persons each being identical to the divine essence, but not identical with each other. I think one of the best people on this, of course, is Bernard Lonergan. So I'm going to do like a heavy punt to Bernard Lonergan. I'm not a specialist in Trinitarian theology, but I think one way to start to help with this is to begin with, they're imperfect. All analogies are imperfect with God, but our psychological analyses, and understanding that with simplicity and immateriality comes a degree of transparency, of self-transparency, right? So the traditional idea of the Trinity is that there's the Father, the idea, the intellect, the Son, the idea, and the intellect's understanding, the shared understanding and love between the Father and Son, right? And you have, as Aquinas, helpfully articulates, these relations of oppositions, right? So within, and we sort of have a faint resemblance in our own consciousness and active understanding, right? We're both knower and known. One reality, one very, we would argue, since we're not materialists, one absolutely ontologically simple reality in a sense, right? Our own consciousness, yet with a sort of relational opposition that is due to a transparency that is grounded within a simplicity, right? I think once you can start to see that, there's an extension that can be made. Of course, it's an imperfect analogy, right? But it's a start to how you can have this inner Trinitarian life within an absolutely simple reality that is one and only one. And you can have these, the three divine persons all sharing in the unrestricted act of understanding itself. And one of the best explanations, I think, to handle these objections, or at least taking it as far as you can go before you just kind of like dump into a principled Mysterianism, would be somebody like Bernard Lonergan. Jim, what would you add? Would you add anything to that?
No, I'm pretty much a Mysterian about the Trinity. Not because I think one has to be. It's the furthest. I've never really thought deeply into the Trinity, right? I think all religions are going to have something you've got to take on, right? I'm convinced by the basic Thomistic package that there's no contradiction in this, right? That's about as far as I've gone.
Yeah. I'll say, because sometimes people think Mysterianism is cheap. I think it can be, but it can also be principled, right? And this is something I've been working with Divine Simplicity, is mystery should be expected with God, because God, if the metaphysics is right, God escapes our normal systems of understanding and classification, right? God doesn't fall into any genus or species. God can't be broken down into parts, which is how we typically understand things, right? So it shouldn't be surprising to us that there is going to be great mystery when it comes to God. Like we should actually expect that, right? And this is why so many in tradition have said, like, if you think that you fully understand God, like you obviously don't, right? What metaphysics does is it gets us to the point where we have a fingertips grasp. We can affirm that God exists, and through the apophatic process and the principle of analogy, we can say true things about God, but it's still just a fingertips grasp, right? And then between the reasonableness of revelation and some of the stuff that I've just said, I think that's enough to take a principled Mysterianism with the Trinity. If you just look at human cognition as something that was evolved in certain very specific circumstances that had very little to do with talking about whether it be quanta, subatomic particles, or deity, right? Okay, then we would expect there's going to be a lot of Mysterianism going on, right? That we're constantly stretching our cognitive powers beyond, right, the conditions that they were set up to be. So I don't see Mysterianism as obscurantism about a lot of things. I think it's honesty about human limitation. Yeah, that's a good distinction, right? That's a good distinction. All right, good stuff. We will do a deeper episode on the Trinity here in the future, because people have been asking for that. I did do an episode probably a couple months back where I gave more of a defense on the Trinity. So I'll ask people to search for that if you want to hear me kind of go a little bit deeper into at least the way that Lonergan thinks about it. All right, let's keep going here. Sorry, my wife has a podcast coming up here, so we're going to have to. Here's one that comes up often enough. OG says, what do you think of Norris Clarke's view that God's knowledge can be intrinsically contingently other than it is because of the creation of creatures? I don't know if that's right with Norris Clarke's view, because he wants to say that God can have a contingent modification in his field of intentional consciousness, right? And he's going to move that outside of God's real being, right? So
I know people get worked up over Clarke on this, but
Yeah, so I actually think that Clarke, at the end of the day, and this is up for debate, I've actually been debating this with myself and others as well, actually holds to an extrinsic model of divine knowing. Now, people think that's kind of weird, like how could knowledge be extrinsic? But knowledge is at least partially partially extrinsic with us, right? Because it's grounded in, so Jim, maybe you want to say a few words about that, right?
I mean, and we should do an episode at some point, especially with the new book being finished, right? I mean, I'm an externalist about knowledge in general, right? Okay. So if it turns out that we're externalists about divine knowing, then then that just makes sense, because that's what knowledge is, right? Yeah. So the idea is, especially with God, where belief and knowledge cannot come apart, right? So it's trickier with us because we can be wrong about things, but with God, presumably he can't be wrong. So God's knowing Jim, for example, just is God's creating Jim intentionally, and Jim having a causal dependence relation on God, right? So God's knowledge is an executive knowledge, and that doesn't require any intrinsic modification in God's real being, right? So I push a model, and I explore this in much more detail in my episode Defending Divine Simplicity. I actually explore 3 models. Clarke's is one of them. I just put Clarke's out there as an option for people of extrinsic models of divine knowing. And this is important because it safeguards
classical theism and simplicity and immutability, but allows for, of course, enormous contingent latitude in creation, whether God creates or doesn't create or stuff like that.
Yeah, one of my absolute favorite texts is Aquinas's Disputed Questions on Truth, and in the actual question on truth in there, Thomas makes this case. He says, what truth is a conformity relation between intellect and something outside of intellect, right? And he says, in the case of in creaturely knowing, the conformity is from intellect to object, right? Like truth occurs, knowledge occurs to the degree to which a finite intellect conforms to a finite thing. Okay, but in God's case, it's the thing conforms to God, right? Okay, you see that? Like, so the knowing happens, the truth happens, or God knows it, but truth comes up to the degree that which things conform to God's idea, right? Well, so the point here is the contingency there is all on the side of the thing now, right?
Yeah, good stuff.
Here.
You're kind of blurring out, Jimmy.
Sorry with this. I have to grab this call real quick, so just give me 1
cool.
second.
Yeah, we'll keep jamming here, guys. If you're enjoying this conversation, please do us a favor. Please like and share and subscribe and all this and that. I super appreciate it. Thomistic Disputations, give you a shout out. Awesome name, awesome channel.
I'm back.
He says he was listening to Pat's podcast on divine simplicity and Trinity when this notification popped up. Well, great to have you here, my friend. I see you also have a question on the Trinity, so I'll say check out that previous podcast, and we'll have Gavin on. We'll do a little deeper dive into the Trinity as well. Let me just get some people in here who haven't had a question answered yet, because probably got like 5-10 more minutes here. Nicolas, LOL, good screen name, he says, I am extremely new to philosophy and theology, and I was wondering what you would recommend for someone looking to be good at both. Well, I'm not going to claim I'm good at theology. Yeah, Jim, where do you start people off as, the self-learners out here? What would be some good recommended starting points for people who want to get more into philosophy and theology?
Read the Republic. Yeah, I'm that's really becoming my thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you have it right there. Good for you. Read the Republic. Yeah. And just I think all the political philosophy stuff is like you'd have to be a completely unschooled mouth breather not to be moved by that stuff, right? So it engages, right? And the Republic isn't that hard. It's deceptively easy, and like every time you read it, you're gonna realize there's layers of complexity and sophistication to it. But I think on a cursory first read, you can take something from that. So I would say read the Republic. Yeah. I know people want the secondary source book, but I'm like, no, let's read the Republic. Yeah.
No. So let me strongly emphasize. I think one of the best parts about my philosophical education, especially my master's program, was the insistence on reading the primary text.
Yes.
Right. I think a truly good classical education must insist that you read the primary text. With that said, I'm going to recommend some secondary texts.
Yes, right.
Just because I so agree with what Jim said. Yes, read the Republic, read Nicomachean Ethics, right? Go read the De Ante, read Boethius, Augustine. Oh, you have to read all of the primary texts. If you want some good secondary texts, I always recommend, if you're interested in metaphysics, he already got brought up, Norris Clarke's One in the Many.
Yep.
Awesome introductory book to metaphysics. I'm also going to recommend two other books that I think are really good, just starting out for philosophy. One is 10 Philosophical Mistakes by Mortimer J. Adler. And it's just, if nothing else, it helps you to start asking better questions, right? And then he goes deeper in 6 great ideas. And he's going to cover ethics, epistemology, metaphysics, freedom of the will, all that stuff, right? And I think that book is not only a great introduction to, I would argue, perennial philosophy, a broad tent Platonism. It's also a good orientation. I think it will orient you in the right way. And as somebody who was so disoriented for many, many years, right? I'd like to try and get people oriented to start. Now, that's not to say that you should just read Thomas. I think that's wrong. I think part of the value that I've gotten from gradually becoming broadly a Thomist is I actually didn't start there, right? I started very much further away from that. So don't restrict yourself to that. And as Jim said, whether you're a Platonist or a Christian, like there's so much value, and Mortimer gets this, right? Mortimer's a great books guy, right? So he's going to have you reading people of just incredibly divergent worldviews if you follow his sort of great books type of curriculum. So I would just, I would put Mortimer there, and then I don't for theology, the Summa. This you can't go wrong as a Summa for a good starting point there.
I'll say this though, in by all means, I like the recommendation of secondary texts, but I've become like so disillusioned with the way philosophy is promulgated now, even dividing things up into epistemology and ethics and like all these subfields. I've become impatient with, right? You know what I mean? And so that's why I'm like, let's go back to the real books, right? But I know that is a hard thing for a lot of people to do if you're doing this outside of university. So something like Adler's a pretty trusted source. Yeah.
Yeah. And Adler's good too, because he started as somebody who was just a very secular agnostic.
Yeah.
And he realized there were all these just issues with modern philosophy. And he realized that, hey, returning to this ancient perennial wisdom helps to solve a lot of issues, right?
Yeah.
So he's somebody who sort of course corrected himself in many ways, which is cool. Yeah. Justin says, who is your favorite analytic philosopher and why does he quack?
My favorite analytic philosopher is Justin West, but who's actually probably, as he asked this question, is maybe 200 meters away from where I sit right now. But anyway, so I'll answer first. If you mean big ticket, big picture, I would say Wittgenstein, late Wittgenstein. But the sense in which he's an analytic philosopher is an interesting question. Mm-hmm. In terms of alive today analytic philosophers, I'd say Robert Brandom of the University of Pittsburgh, right?
Yep.
And what makes him quack for me is his basic Hegelian inferentialist way of thinking about mind-world relation is very integral to my own thinking. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you want more, Justin, come by the porch. I'm around all day.
Sweet. There's some really good like analytic Thomists, and I guess I'll just start with the guy who coined that term, which is John Haldane.
Yeah.
I think that guy is such a boss on so many different levels.
Yeah.
So I'll just add him to the list.
Yeah. And Haldane's one of those guys, okay, like whether you agree with him or not, the guy will lay out the menu really well for you, right?
Yeah. Like there's certain places with him that I part ways, but the dude is just, you can't accuse him of not being rigorous and precise, right? Cool. Let's take one or two more here. Jim, here's back to fitness. Barrett says, I'm relatively new to BJJ. As a white belt that understands and defense and survival is the most important part of my game right now. What is the most important thing I should be working on?
Mount escape, side control escape, guard retention, back escape, right? Knee on belly escape. Escapes, and getting your guard back and keeping it. If you get through a roll and you don't get subbed and you're a new white belt, that's a good roll, right? If you get through a roll where you keep a guard the entire time, that is a grand victory, right? Escapes and guard retention, right?
Good. Yep. Simple and straightforward. Voltaire says, what is the best argument against theism, in your guys' opinion? The coherence of theism objections, I think, are the most. Here's let's set the map, right? Let's put the map out there. Some objections to theism are what we try and call like undercutting objections. They're like, here's why your argument for God doesn't work, right? There's many of those. Others are rebutting objections. We say like, here's why the conclusion of your argument don't work, and this is why it can't be right? And there's tons of those out there, right? There's paradoxes related to omnipotence and omniscience and stuff like that. But I think the best one is still the most classic one, which is the problem of evil. At the end of the day, as somebody who spent enormous time working through, I think, some of the most clever objections against God, the one that I think is the toughest, both intellectually and on a personal level, is the problem of evil. And I think that's why it has been the perennial argument against God. So
I agree. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and if I may, this is. I think that episode that we did, I think it was part 3 of your Jordan Peterson series on the problem of evil. I think that was some of our best stuff that we've done.
Yeah.
And I really do encourage, the listener to have a look at that. Right. Not because we're so great, although we are on our game that day. But just because I think we were really honest about like how deep a problem this is, and right. And our addressing of it should not be too quick. Yeah. So
yeah.
I agree with problem evil, and I'd be careful calling this though an objection to theism, because the guy's a theist, right? But I think some of Kant's critiques of natural theology in the first critique, I think, have a kind of traction that needs to be dealt with, right? And I think a great introduction, he'll give you a secondary source, a great introduction to all of that, and I think a great reply from a theist is the first part of Roger Scruton's The Face of God is really, really good on this, like laying out what the Kantian position is on this, why he admires it so much, but then giving a scholastic, quasi-Thomistic like reply to it. Really well done. And yeah, so I highly recommend that.
Yeah, it's Gavin, I think, would probably agree with you, because part of the reason he did he focused where he did on his PhD is because he took Kant's criticism so seriously.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So yeah, it'd be good to get Gavin's thoughts on that as well. Now, look, at the end of the day, I think all these can be overcome.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah.
But it's not something that you can just easily sort of wave away by any means. It's serious business, right? So I want to appreciate that. Jim, what else you got coming up here, man, before we wrap up here, aside from the new website? Any final announcements?
New website. That's about it. Right now I've kind of gotten all the stuff I want written for the summer done. So just hammering my way through Hegel's Encyclopedia Logic, right? And having a hell of a lot of fun with that. So yeah, I'm going to see my kids play this afternoon. So
very cool.
Yep. Oh, so if you're in Atchison, 2:00, hit it.
There it is. Well, let's do one more. Octus Pura says, do you think the notion of everything being present before God entails eternalism? I think for God, right? Yeah. So I think all these debates about eternalism and presentism, I think the right account is the account Eleanor Stump develops. You'll find, I think, the best starting treatment of that in her book, Aquinas, where she's going to develop the ET simultaneity theory, right? So yes, God is eternal. We're in time. You chuck the idea of an absolute reference frame, I think, and then there's arguments of like, well, is that eternalism? Is that presentism? Who cares? Well, I just think it's right.
There's no frame, so there's no there's no ism that
yeah. So I just wanted to just put that recommendation in, because I keep seeing these debates going on and on. And I think Stump just nails it in that respect. Excellent. Right. All right, awesome. All right, well, gentle listeners, we got a piece. My wife's got to borrow the microphone here. She's got her own podcast to do it, but these have been awesome.
This has been a good Q&A, man.
They don't take it easy on us either. These are good. These are good questions. I really appreciate that. So hopefully we've given some. They're good questions and they deserve good responses. Whether we gave you good responses, I don't know, but we gave you. You get what you pay for at the Pat Flynn Show, and somebody only paid $5. So we do appreciate it, though. So thanks for tuning in. Please please share, please subscribe, and we'll be doing this again soon, my friends. Until
we would do just about anything for $5, really. So
yeah, test us.
Fine, yeah.
All right. Hey, we'll catch you at least Friday when we unveil Jim's new website. So get ready to tune in then, guys. All right.